This is the story of Daniel Ware and his wife Claudia Ware. They had been married 11 years when the silence between them stopped feeling comfortable and began, instead, to feel like something held in a clenched fist. Claudia was the kind of woman who had always needed an audience, not out of vanity, exactly, but out of a deep, restless hunger to be witnessed, to be confirmed. Daniel had once been her audience of one, and that had been enough for both of them. But somewhere in the ordinariness of a shared life, the mortgage, the routines, the meals eaten while reading separate screens, he had stopped watching her the way she needed to be watched. He hadn't noticed he'd stopped. That was the particular cruelty of it. Not that he withdrew his love, but that he withdrew his attention so gradually that neither of them had thought to name it. What would unravel between them was not dramatic. It was domestic, and domestic wounds, quiet and repeated, are the ones that don't close. The house smelled like garlic and wine when Daniel came home that Thursday. Claudia had started dinner without him, which was not unusual, and she had already opened a bottle of Malbec, which lately had also stopped being unusual. She was standing at the stove in the yellow dress she saved for occasions, her dark hair pinned loosely at the neck, and when she turned to look at him, the expression on her face was the particular one she wore when she had been waiting too long and had decided not to mention it. "You're late," she said. 20 minutes, he said. "I didn't say it was a lot." He set his bag down and washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and she finished the risotto, and they sat across from each other at the table they'd bought together from an estate sale in Montclair, the one with the ring stain from a wine glass neither of them had made. They talked about her sister Petra's renovation. They talked about the neighbor's dog. They talked the way people talk when they have learned to navigate around the things that would cost too much to say. Daniel was 43. He worked in municipal planning. Not glamorous work, but work he believed in, quietly and without needing anyone else to believe in it. He was a man built for the long view. He read slowly. He made decisions slowly. He was patient in the way that certain people mistake for passivity, and Claudia had perhaps made that mistake, or perhaps she hadn't made it yet, but was in the process of arriving there. She had organized her birthday party herself, as she always did, because planning things gave her a particular pleasure. The guest list, the flowers, the bottles arranged by label. 40 people were coming on Saturday. Daniel had taken Friday off to help with setup, which she had thanked him for in the way she thanked him for things now, efficiently, without looking up from her phone. Saturday arrived clear and warm. Their garden had never looked better. Claudia moved through her guests like a current in water, touching an arm here, laughing there, and Daniel circulated the way he always circulated at her parties, steadily, speaking to the people he knew, refilling glasses when he noticed they were low. He noticed, around 9 o'clock, that she had been talking to a man named Philip Stour for an unusual length of time. Philip was a client of hers. She ran a small interior design firm, and Daniel had met him once, at a work dinner, and found him unremarkable in the specific way that very confident men can seem unremarkable to the people they are about to replace. Philip laughed with his whole body. He had the kind of ease that came from never having worried about money. Daniel brought Claudia a fresh glass of wine and she accepted it without breaking her sentence, which was fine. He drifted back into the crowd. It was Petra who told him later what had happened. She found him in the kitchen refilling the bread basket and she was already wincing when she touched his arm. "She's had a lot to drink," Petra said, which was how people in their family introduced things they were sorry about. "I know," he said. "She said something out there. About you." Petra looked at the bread basket. "She was doing that thing where she performs for whoever she's talking to. Philip asked something about your work, and she..." "She called you small-minded. And then she laughed and said something about real men going after what they want. People laughed because they thought it was a joke." Daniel stood very still. He could hear Claudia's laugh from the garden, that particular high laugh she used for audiences. "Was it a joke?" he said. Petra didn't answer right away. That was its own answer. He went back outside. He smiled when people spoke to him. He poured wine. He helped carry the cake from the kitchen while the guests sang and Claudia glowed at the center of it. Beautiful and lit from within by something he recognized, now was not directed at him. He did not say anything that night. They cleaned up together in near silence, Claudia moving in the loose, slightly careless way of someone who is drunk just enough to feel absolved of precision. She fell asleep quickly. He lay beside her in the dark and listened to her breathe. Around 2 in the morning, he got up for water. He passed her phone on the nightstand. It lit up with nothing, just the clock. He picked it up. He didn't entirely know why. He told himself he was checking the time, but he already knew the time. He set it back down and went to the kitchen and drank his water standing at the sink, looking at the garden, at the dark shapes of the chairs still arranged from the party. Then he went back to the bedroom and picked up the phone again. He did not read everything that night. He read enough. The messages were from Philip's story. They went back 4 months. They were not, strictly speaking, explicit. Not in the way that word is usually understood, but they were intimate in a manner far more disorienting than explicit would have been. There was familiarity in them. There was a private language, references to things Daniel did not know about, a Tuesday lunch, a walk somewhere. A song Claudia had said reminded her of him. "You understand me in ways I forgot I could be understood," she had written. Daniel read that sentence 3 times. He set the phone down carefully, exactly where it had been. He went back to bed. He did not sleep. In the morning he made coffee, and Claudia came downstairs in the old gray sweater she wore on weekend mornings, and she looked slightly rough and slightly soft at the same time, the way she always did after parties, and she poured herself a cup and leaned against the counter and said, "I think the risotto was better last time." "I thought it was good," he said. "You always think everything is good." She said it without edge. It was just an observation, the way she catalogued him, but he heard it differently now. He had begun to hear everything differently now, recalibrating backward, adjusting the meaning of 100 small moments the way you adjust a photograph's exposure, and suddenly see detail in all the places that seemed dark before. He went to work on Monday and sat at his desk and did his work. He was good at his work. He had always been steady, and steadiness, he was discovering, was a quality that could be turned inward, used not to perform calm but to actually be calm while thinking very clearly about a situation that required clear thought. He called his friend Owen Marsh for lunch on Wednesday. Owen was a divorce attorney. He did not ask Owen anything directly. He asked about Owen's practice in the general way of someone making conversation, and Owen talked, and Daniel listened and remembered. At home, meanwhile, he watched. He watched the way Claudia held her phone now, angled slightly away, screen dimmed. He watched the way she smiled at whatever she was reading before she composed her face back to neutral. He noticed she had started going to the gym on Tuesday evenings, though she'd had the same gym membership for 2 years and had used it primarily on Saturdays. He noticed she smelled different when she came home. Not perfumed, but freshly showered, which meant she had showered there. He did not confront her. He understood, in some deep and functional part of himself, that a confrontation would only compress everything into a single scene that she could then manage and survive and recover from. Claudia was very good at scenes. She knew how to cry in a way that redirected culpability. She knew how to reframe. What Daniel was discovering about himself, slowly the way he discovered most things, was that he was not angry in the explosive sense. He was angry in the geological sense. Something had shifted far below the surface, permanent and enormous, and the landscape above it would never look quite the same again, though from a distance you might not immediately notice. They had dinner together 3 times that week. They talked about her commission for a renovated brownstone in the Heights. They talked about whether to reshingle the garage roof before winter. One evening, she put her hand on his arm while they were watching television, and he let her, and he felt, from very far away, something that might have been grief. On Friday she said, "You've been quiet this week." "I've had a lot on my mind at work," he said. She nodded. accepted it, did not push. That was the night he began to understand the full dimension of the problem, not the infidelity. He had already absorbed the fact of that, the way you absorb a diagnosis, with a strange quiet that comes before the real feelings arrive. What he understood now was the specific nature of what she had done at the party. She had not insulted him carelessly. She had insulted him for someone. She had performed his smallness for an audience of one hidden among 40, offered it up as a kind of gift, a proof that she was not like him, that she was bigger, more alive, more in need of something he could not provide. He sat with that for a long time after she'd gone to sleep. Then he opened his laptop and began to think. He told her on a Sunday 3 weeks later. Not with documents, not with accusations. He waited until after breakfast, when they were both still at the table, and he said, "I've read some of the messages between you and Philip." Claudia went still in the way that a room goes still when a window is suddenly opened. "Daniel, I'm not going to ask you to explain them," he said. "I've thought about what I want to say, and I want to say it without us getting into a version of this that neither of us will be able to take back. So I'd like you to just listen." She was holding her coffee cup with both hands. He noticed she did not put it down. "I understand that something has been missing for a while," he said, "and I know I'm not blameless for that. I know how I go quiet. I know the ways I've made you feel like you were talking to a wall." He paused. "What I don't think you understand, and maybe couldn't, is what it cost me to hear you describe me the way you did at your party, in front of those people, in front of him." "That was—" She stopped. "I was drunk." "You were," he said, "but you knew what you were saying." She looked at her coffee. Her jaw moved slightly the way it did when she was building towards something. He recognized the shape of what was coming, the refrain, the context, the history that would cast her actions as responses rather than choices, and he felt, to his own surprise, a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with anger. "I felt invisible," she said finally. "I know that doesn't justify. I'm not saying it does. But I have felt for a long time like you look through me, like I could leave the room and you'd finish the paragraph before you noticed." "Maybe," he said. "And Philip—" Her voice changed. "Philip asked me things. About what I thought, what I cared about. I know how that sounds. It sounds like someone who knows what you need to hear," Daniel said. "Not cruelly, just observationally." She looked at him for the first time fully. "What are you saying?" she said. "I'm saying I think we've both been somewhere else for a while, but we've only been honest about it in ways that hurt each other." He stood up and carried his plate to the sink. "I'm going to stay at Owen's for a bit. I'm not announcing anything. I'm not making any decisions tonight. I just need to be in a different place while I think." "Daniel." Her voice was low. "Don't do this quietly. That's worse. If you're angry, be angry. Tell me I ruined it. Shout at me. Don't just disappear." He turned to look at her. He thought about what to say. He thought about how many times she had told him over the years that she needed him to feel more, express more, be louder in his love. He thought about the fact that the quality she was now asking him to perform was the same quality she had mocked in front of 40 people and one man who asked her what she thought about things. "I'll call you," he said. He left before noon. He stayed at Owen's for 2 weeks, then found a furnished apartment in a building near the river. It was small and smelled faintly of the previous tenant's coffee, and he bought a lamp and a good pan and enough groceries for a week. And he found this, the bare act of provisioning a life, unexpectedly clarifying. He was not happy. He was not performing stoicism. He woke some mornings with a weight across his chest that he recognized as grief, actual grief, for the marriage as it had been at its best. Early Sunday mornings, the way she used to laugh at his terrible jokes, a trip to Portugal 6 years ago when they had been enough for each other in a small pension room with high windows. He let himself feel all of that. He had always been good at sitting with things. He had, in the weeks before he left, moved quietly. He had spoken to a financial advisor and separated his retirement account. He had begun routing his paycheck to a personal account that Claudia had never used. He had not hidden anything that he was legally required to disclose, but he had organized it, the way a careful man organizes anything, so that when the formal conversation came, nothing would be caught off guard or tangled. Claudia called him 4 times the first week. He answered twice. Their conversations were careful, both of them feeling for the shape of what this was. "Are you filing?" she asked the second call. "I'm thinking," he said. "Philip ended it," she said. "I want you to know that." "Did he end it or did you?" A pause. It became clear he wasn't." She stopped. "He wasn't what I thought." Daniel absorbed that. He had suspected as much. Philip Storr had the profile of a man who collected what he could not keep, the attention, the confession, the private language, and then returned undisturbed to his own life. Claudia had given him something real, and received in exchange something that was only real while she was in the room. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it, and he was aware that it was a strange thing to mean. She called him 3 more times over the following month. The calls changed in tone as weeks accumulated. The first was sad. The second was slightly resentful. She had told the story to people he could tell, and the story had a shape now in which his quietness and his emotional absence were the foundations from which everything else had grown. By the third call, she was something else entirely. Frightened, he thought. Not of losing him exactly, but of what it meant that she'd arrived here. She was 42. She had built her sense of herself on being wanted, on being someone who generated feeling in others. And she was now in a place where the man who'd wanted her for 11 years had packed a lamp and a pan and moved to a room by the river without shouting. She had expected the shouting. She had, he now understood, needed it. The shouting would have been a proof of magnitude, proof that she mattered enough to destroy something. His quietness denied her that. He did not do it to deny her. He did it because it was who he was, and he was done apologizing for that. He filed in November. It was not contentious. They had no children. And Daniel had been organized, and Claudia, to her credit, did not fight the numbers. Her sister Petra called him once, and said she was sorry, and he told her there was nothing for her to be sorry about, and he meant that too. He ate dinner alone most evenings and was surprised to find it was not mostly lonely. He was relearning the texture of his own company. He had opinions about things, it turned out. He liked certain films she had always dismissed. He cooked more slowly when there was no one to wait for. One evening, he sat by his window with a book he wasn't reading and thought about the word she had used at the party. Small. He turned it over, considered it. There were senses in which she'd meant it as damage. Small-minded, small in aspiration, small in the way that men who don't roar can seem small to people who confuse volume with size. But he thought about what he'd done in the months since that party. The clarity, the patience, the decisions made without noise. He thought, I wonder if she knows what it looks like now, from the outside. They met in January at the kitchen table of what had been their home, to sign the final transfer paperwork for the house. It was a gray morning. Claudia had made coffee. She didn't ask if he wanted any, just set a cup in front of him, which he thought was the most honest gesture she'd made in a long time. She looked well, in the way that people can look well when they have been working very hard at looking well. She had cut her hair. The paperwork was straightforward. They signed where the markers indicated. Their attorney had arranged everything. It was mostly initialing. When they were finished, she sat back and looked at her hands on the table and said, I keep thinking about something you said that morning. He waited. You said I knew what I was saying at the party. She looked up. I've thought about whether you were right about that. What did you decide? She was quiet for a moment in the particular way she'd always been quiet when she was choosing honesty over protection. I think I wanted to be witnessed, she said. And I couldn't figure out how to ask you for that, so She stopped. I found someone who was offering it, and I wanted to show him that I was worth witnessing, and showing him that meant showing him you didn't see me." "I know," he said. "That's not an excuse. I know that too. Do you think," she stopped again, "started differently? Do you think you could have seen me more if I'd asked differently?" He thought about it honestly. He thought about the 11 years, the routines, the ways he'd retreated into his own inner weather without marking it on any map she could follow. He thought about his own failings, which were real and his fully. "Maybe," he said. "I think I got comfortable in a way that made you feel erased. I don't think I meant to. I think I thought love was something you could maintain on its own, like a building that doesn't need work once it's standing." She nodded slowly. "I don't think I knew how to want things out loud," she said. "And then when I found a way to want things out loud, it was." She almost smiled, not at anything funny, at the particular geometry of how people destroy things. It was the wrong thing. The coffee was going cold. Neither of them moved to address it. He stood eventually, and gathered his copy of the papers, and put on his coat. She walked him to the door the way she'd walked him to the door 1,000 times, and they stood in the frame with the gray light behind him, and between them was everything: the Portugal pension room and the estate sale table, and the party garden and the quiet weeks after, and the small apartment by the river. All of it present and accounted for, nothing denied. "Take care of yourself, Daniel," she said. "You too, Claudia." He walked to his car. He did not look back, not because he was making a point, but because there was nothing left in that direction that was his. He drove toward the river, toward his building, toward the lamp he had bought and the life he was provisioning, day by ordinary day. She had wanted him to be louder. She had wanted size measured in volume, in the willingness to break things when broken. He had learned, in those quiet months of coffee and paperwork and evenings alone by the window, that the largest thing a man can do is refuse to become what pain is asking him to become. He had not shouted, he had not begged, he had not performed his wound for an audience of 1 or 40. He had simply, steadily become himself, more completely than he'd ever been in 11 years of being someone's husband, and driven toward it without looking back. "You wanted a bigger man. I became one.